Hello, and welcome to South Asia Diary with me, Mariam Wardak. Our cover story tonight is about the biggest refugee crisis in the region, the Rohingya from Myanmar. In 2017, more than 700,000 Rohingya fled persecution from the Myanmar army. Today, they live in Bangladesh. The Cox's Bazar refugee camp is the largest in the world. Its size has swelled to more than 1 million refugees. Most of them have the same questions. When can they return home? Bangladesh is running out of both patience and resources to deal with this growing crisis. On tonight's episode, we tell you how the world community is helping Bangladesh and how the repatriation process is going. Also on the show,
Sri Lanka stares at a food crisis as rice crops across the island fail due to lack of fertilizers and equipment. How did Nepal's holiest river, the Bagmati, become the country's most polluted water body? An elephant in Pakistan gets a root canal after an injury left its tusk infected. Another explosion rips through a mosque in Kabul. All indications are it was carried out by the Islamic State.
the United Nations Human Rights Chief visited the Rohingya camps in Bangladesh last week. It was her first official visit to the country. During this trip, she met with dozens of refugees, visited their homes, and also inspected the food markets. What were the big takeaways from this inspection tour? Is the UN ready to facilitate the Rohingyas' return to Myanmar? Let's take a look.
Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. Today is an important day for the refugees and camp officials here. The UN Human Rights Chief is visiting. The camp is home to more than 1 million Rohingya refugees. They fled persecution in neighboring Myanmar, and in 2017, they settled here. The UN Human Rights Chief arrived in a white SUV. She was welcomed by local officials and a battery of photographers. It was the first visit by a UN Rights Chief to Bangladesh. She was shown around the houses. She spoke to a few Rohingya men and women, and finally visited a food market in the camp. Most people she met had the same question: when can we return?
All of them have said, we want to go back, but we want to go back when we have an identity as citizens of Myanmar, when our rights are respected, we can have our livelihoods again, and we can have our land, and we can feel they're part of a country.
Security is another issue. Murders, kidnappings, and drug trade are rife inside the camps. This month was further proof. 2 refugee leaders were shot dead by an insurgent group. Last year, in September, there was another attack. Rohingya leader Mohibullah was shot dead in his office. Both attacks were allegedly carried out by the same group, the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. For Bangladesh, the refugees are a financial and political challenge. The country is still listed as an LDC by the United Nations. LDC stands for Least Developed Country. So Dhaka's goal is to repatriate the Rohingya, to send them back to their homeland in Myanmar. Just one problem: will the Myanmar regime accept them back? Will the refugees be safe there? The UN Human Rights Chief believes the conditions are not ideal for their return.
The international community must sustain its efforts to Bangladesh in its response and press Myanmar to create conditions for return, address the root causes, and pursue accountability. These are people who fled extreme violence and systematic discrimination 5 years ago in one of the largest movements of people in recent history.
The clock is ticking for the Rohingya. Bangladesh's government could soon run out of patience and resources. Earlier this month, Dhaka requested China's help for repatriation.
China will work continuously for a political solution to the Rohingya crisis. Our foreign minister has strongly stated that we need China's assistance. China made great progress. Now it needs a conclusion.
China does enjoy close ties with Myanmar's military junta, but they alone cannot help. Last week, a top UN official paid an official visit to Myanmar, the first since the junta captured power in 2020. The military regime has done very little to reform itself. Last month, 4 democracy activists were executed over terror charges. Unless things improve in Myanmar, the Rohingya cannot return. And until the Rohingya cannot return, Bangladesh will be on the edge. South Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
A bomb blast on a mosque in Kabul killed more than 20 people. It is a part of a string of attacks that have been linked to the Islamic State. Since last year, both the Taliban and the Islamic State have been locked in a turf war. Kabul alone has been attacked more than 30 times. But recently, the attacks have become more brazen. What explains this newfound confidence in this dreaded terror group? Does the Taliban have a plan to counter them?
August 17, Kabul. It was supposed to be an evening of peace and prayer. Dozens of worshippers gathered at this mosque. In minutes, their lives were turned upside down. A massive explosion ripped through the building. Debris and shrapnel flew everywhere.
It was evening prayer time and I was attending the prayer with others when the explosion happened. It was a very powerful explosion inside the mosque. Around 24 to 25 people were killed and several others were wounded.
When the dust settled, the destruction was laid bare. 21 people were killed in the blast. More than 33 others injured. Nobody has claimed responsibility for the attack, but everything points to the ISKP, the Islamic State Khorasan province. The blast also killed the imam of this mosque, Amir Mohammed Kabuli. Many say he preached a moderate Sufi faith, something the Islamic State despises. Most of the survivors were rushed to this hospital. It is run by an Italian NGO. Doctors say 35 patients were admitted here, including 9 children and teenagers.
30% of the admitted patients are in severe condition, in serious condition, and they've underwent major surgery, so vascular explorations, vascular repairs, and intra-abdominal injury repairs and management. So this is something that is demanding quite a lot of time, resources, and expertise to, let's say, minimize the possibility of complications and reduce the mortality.
Recently, such attacks have increased in frequency. Just a week before this blast, there was another targeted attack. A prominent cleric, Rahimullah Haqqani, was killed. The Islamic State claimed the attack. Experts say this string of incidents shows the ISKP is expanding their focus. Initially, they targeted the Shia Hazaras. But now, mosques and imams are being hit. All of this raised questions about the Taliban's anti-terror capabilities. This month, August, has seen an uptick in violence. Almost 250 people killed in attacks. The United Nations is seeking prompt action from the Taliban. But does the new regime have the political will to take on the Islamic State? On paper, they are enemies. The Islamic State has global jihadist ambitions, unlike the Taliban. They also despise the new regime's outreach to the US and Europe. But below these obvious differences, there are links. The Taliban's Haqqani network is believed to be close to the Islamic State. Many ISKP terrorists are also former Taliban fighters. So the regime in Kabul is not as helpless as they make it seem. Until they take action, such attacks will continue. Such mass graves will dot the Kabul landscape. The residents are yet to come to terms with last week's attack.
He was my cousin. May God have mercy. He went for the evening prayer in the mosque. The blast happened. Unfortunately, this incident happened. It was 12 at night in the hospital when we found out that he had lost his life. He was in the emergency.
The tough war between Islamic State and the Taliban benefits the regime in Kabul. They can use it to leverage international aid, pitch themselves as the better of the two evils. But in this high-risk political game, ordinary Afghans are the losers. South Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
Root canals are among the simplest operations for any dentist. But what if your patient is an elephant? In Pakistan, a 17-year-old Jumbo was dealing with insufferable pain. Her task had been broken and the tissues inside were infected. The solution? A root canal. After 4 hours and a lot of drilling, the elephant is now pain-free. Here's a report on the most unique root canal you have ever seen.
17-year-old Madhubala has an infection in her tusk. A team of vets from Four Paws, an animal welfare organization, carried out a surgery on the female elephant at Karachi Zoo. She was sedated for the operation. They not only wish to relieve the pain, they say if left untreated, the infection could make her blind or even kill her.
In the first elephant, that infection is already dramatically advanced, and if we leave that like it is, she will be blind very soon, because that goes up to the eye and then it goes to the brain and will kill her. So this operation today is highly needed to save the elephant and make her life much better.
The doctors say they used a new unique technique that requires less complicated aftercare. The surgery required special instruments such as drills and burrs.
We developed some instrument and equipment which we are using now to go inside to lose this broken part of the tusk from the skull, to take it totally out, to clean, to disinfect the inflammation. So it's a complicated procedure, and it has to be done precisely, step by step. We are not in a hurry. Important is the elephant animal come first for us. So it's no matter how long this take, whatever how long it takes, it should be probably done.
Doctors also say they were very cautious while doing the procedure because the tusk had become very fragile because of the infection.
It's very deep inside the skull, and because the inflammation and the infection is since very long time, the dental tissue it's very thin and very breakable. I mean, there are a lot of cracks, and we saw them with the endoscopy. We started today with the endoscopy, and now we are removing part by part because the tissue is not strong enough that you can take it at once, but it should be part by part.
The dead tissue was removed and the root canal was cleaned. The vets taught local caregivers to conduct regular post-treatment, flushing and cleaning the wounds to prevent further inflammation. Noor Jahan, the other female elephant at the zoo, will also undergo a similar surgery over the next few days. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Sri Lanka's troubles simply don't seem to end. After an economic and political crisis, the island is now facing a food shortage. The rice crops across Sri Lanka is failing. The lack of fertilizers and farm equipment are being blamed. To make matters worse, rice is the Sri Lankan staple. How does the government plan to tide over this crisis? Does it have enough foreign exchange to import food.
No meal is complete without rice in Sri Lanka. Lunch, dinner, dessert. You name your time and your place. Chances are, rice will be on the table. The average Sri Lankan eats 107 kilograms of it every year, which is why the latest news is worrying. Across the island, rice crops are stunted. In northern Sri Lanka, the average output used to be 4.5 tons per hectare. That was before the economic crisis. Now, just 2.3 metric tons. The gap is massive. And for rice-crazy Sri Lanka, it's an existential crisis. Almost 2 million people in the country are rice farmers. That's nearly 25% of all people engaged in farming. Their summer harvest has fallen below expectations, perhaps just half of last year's. Like all things in Sri Lanka, it comes down to their financial crisis. With no foreign exchange, Sri Lanka could not import fertilizers or fuel for tractors or farming equipment. As a result, the crops suffered. Most paddy fields in the country became stunted. For Sri Lanka, it's a double whammy. If local production is insufficient, the government must import food. That means spending valuable dollars. Sri Lanka had been self-sufficient in rice for decades, but that ended last year. The country imported 149,000 tons of rice. This year, they have a contract to buy another 424,000 tons. And if things don't improve, perhaps more. The next sowing season is in September. Those crops will take at least 4 months to reach ideal growth. But even that is not a guarantee. As farming becomes more unreliable, many farmers are rethinking the next season. Some are planning to sit out the September sowing. Their reasoning is simple. Earlier, you could farm 75 acres of land with 75,000 Sri Lankan rupees. That's nearly $197. Your output would be 40 bags of rice from each acre. Now that's changed. The average cost is almost 200,000 Sri Lankan rupees. Even then, your output is only 18 to 20 bags of rice. Everything is more expensive. Urea once sold for 1,500 Sri Lankan rupees. Now, almost 40,000. The price of empty sacks has trebled to 160. So for many farmers, agriculture is simply not viable anymore. The crisis could trigger food insecurity on the island. Food inflation is already 90% up. 6.7 million Sri Lankans are not getting enough food. If the rice harvest does not improve, it may push Sri Lanka back over the edge. South Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
Nepal is home to one of the holiest rivers in Hindu mythology, the Bagmati. It has nourished millions of people living in Kathmandu Valley. But today, the river has changed. It is clogged with garbage and sewage. Some are calling it the most polluted river in the country. How did Bagmati go from being the holiest to the most polluted in Nepal? Let's find out.
Dozens line up at this tiger head high in the Himalayas. From its gaping mouth emerges a steady stream. Miles down the hill, that stream grows into a force of nature. Bagmati, Nepal's holiest river, also its most polluted.
And Bagmati used to be a very sacred river. It's a holy river actually. Lots of rituals are connected with Bagmati and was almost very clean about 4 decades ago and gradually started to deteriorate because that was a common place for everybody to bring their garbage in and dump their drainage in. That started to pollute Bagmati.
The river itself is 586 kilometers long. It follows a winding trajectory down the Himalayas, into the Kathmandu Valley. As it reaches the capital, the color changes from clear to brown and then black. Environmentalists blame sewage dumping. Dozens of settlements dot Bagmati's banks as it makes its way downstream. People here fling their garbage straight into the water.
The drainage system was not as good. So the only place they could dump their drainage was into the river. And that's where the Bagmati was there. So all the drainage started to come in, and this is how it gradually started to get polluted, and now it has become the most polluted river in the country.
For Nepal, this isn't just an ecological crisis. Bagmati holds a special place in Hindu mythology. The belief is it can purify your soul. The river flows past several sacred sites in the country. Chief among them is this, the Pashupatinath Temple in Kathmandu. It was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1979. Hindus flock to this temple for prayers and festivals. The river is a big part of both. Even in death, the Nepalese place a great deal of emphasis on Bagmati.
Traditionally, bodies used to be laid on the bank of the river and their face and feet washed with the water from the river, and water poured over the mouth of the body, and only then was it cremated. That is not there anymore. Now, bodies are brought for cremation, but the rituals are done using mineral water that is bought in the stores and then cremated.
Both the government and volunteers are trying hard to clean the river. But the challenge is daunting. The more they clean, the more trash gets dumped.
Since we began the cleaning campaign, we have managed to remove almost all the garbage that was dumped for decades on the banks of the river. We had removed at least 80% of that garbage, which at some places were just heaps of trash.
Others have given up on government action. They believe only divine intervention can save the Bagmati.
Unless there's a miracle from the gods themselves, this river will not be totally cleaned. To do that, the gods need to create a big storm and rain, which could also cause a lot of damage at the same time.
Perhaps a miracle is what Nepal needs. Millions of people have grown up in close proximity with Bagmati. Their life begins in these tumbling waters. It also ends with her kind embrace. So, rescuing it isn't just an ecological mission. It must be a national priority. South Asia Bureau, WION. World is One.
That's all we have for you on this episode of South Asia Diary. We'll be back next week with a brand new lineup of stories. Until then, stay safe. I am Mariam Wardak, and you are watching WION. World is One.